Okay, you guys ready to get started? Let's
Yeah.
get started. Great. Okay, well, welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us today for our What to Know webinar on the USDA's Discrimination Financial Assistance Program. I'm Nicole Cook. I'm the Environmental and Agricultural Faculty Legal Specialist with Maryland's Agricultural Law Education Initiative at the University of Maryland Eastern Shore. And I was so glad to be asked by the folks from the Farmers Legal Action Group, or FLAG, to help them get the word out about this important program from the USDA. And it's a program that's designed to provide financial assistance to farmers, ranchers, forest landowners who have experienced discrimination in USDA farm lending programs in the past. And FLAG is one of the organizations that is serving as a cooperator to help get this word out about the program, as well as providing assistance to folks in helping you understand how to apply for the program. They've got a lot of information to go through today, as well as taking your questions. And, you know, I think we still have a small enough group of attendees here that I'm going to go ahead with it, as far as I can. I think I can allow people to unmute themselves and ask questions. And Lindsay and Stephen have said that they'll take questions throughout the program. They'll be breaking the application down into sections, and then they'll give you an opportunity to ask questions as they go along. And of course, we'll have an opportunity at the end as well to ask questions. Also, we do have a Q&A box. And so for people who would like to put their questions in the Q&A box, I will be monitoring that, and we'll get to those questions as well. And I want to remind folks that this is being recorded, and a copy of the recording is going to be available on the UMES Extension webpage, and that is umes.edu/extension. And I will post that link in the chat as well. And now I get the chance to introduce you to your speakers. So we have today, we have Stephen Carpenter, who is the Deputy Director and Senior Staff Attorney at FLAG. And we have Lindsay Keene, an attorney at FLAG. I'm going to let you guys just take it away. And again, I will be posting links also in the chat for folks who want to grab onto some information. So great. Thanks, guys.
Hey, thanks, Nicole. Well, Stephen and I are very happy to be here today, and hopefully to shed some light on the program. And to that end, I just wanted to give a very brief background on FLAG, on our organization. So the Farmers Legal Action Group, we are a nonprofit law firm. We are based out of Minnesota, but we have been doing civil rights work for the past several decades. We began in the 80s, kind of amidst the farm crisis. And since then, you know, our mission is really to help keep family farmers on the land. And so we try to go about that in a variety of ways, but most relevant, I think, to this program and to a lot of programs that come out, we write a lot of guides. So we try to put a lot of information out there, and the guides are really intended to be for farmers, as well as farm advocates and farm organizations. And we try to write information in a way that is, you know, more easily digestible, even if pretty dry. We also try to include a lot of footnotes in our materials so that if you want to check, you know, the source or where information came from, that it's relatively easy to do so. And for this program, we did write, when it first opened in July, we published a 4-page guide to the Discrimination Financial Assistance Program. And we can put a link, I think Stephen is probably doing that now, to the 4-page guide. And currently we're in the process of, hopefully by the end of this week, publishing a much longer guide, perhaps longer than anyone wants to read, but it will have a lot more detail. You know, we recognize this program is important, but the application can also be a bit overwhelming, I think, for many people. So we want to recognize that and just help people and organizations that are working with farmers to make sure that folks are able to submit the best application they can. So that's a little background on FLAG. I think I'm going to turn it over to Stephen just to give a bit of context for this program.
Thanks, Lindsay. I think I just posted the guide to the 4-pager, or did Nicole, did you do? Oh, excellent. Okay, because I think I may have screwed it up. So it is really a pleasure to be with everybody. And we've emphasized that we've got 20-some people we want to make sure that people get a chance to ask questions and chat about all this. And so feel free, if we say something that seems confusing or you've got a question, to go ahead and put it in the chat box, or just ask is completely fine. And so our plan is to do a little bit of a background and introduction to what the program is kind of all about, and then to take a walk through the application itself. And there we'll share screens and we'll kind of just talk about what we think are some of the important and high points to the application itself. So let's just start with a bit of background. And I'm just going to say, based on our experience before we get going here, I'm guessing some people on are farmers and some work with farmers. It's really, this topic and so the whole point of the program is to sort of get at some of the discrimination that has gone on in the past. And so one of the things that we've noticed is that working with people and farmers, this is really a very powerful issue for people. This is not just, what's my CRP contract going to look like, which matters a great deal, but this is about people's dignity and their experience and their identity. And, we're not here to dwell on USDA's history, but USDA was created in the Lincoln administration, and it would be shocking if it hadn't perpetuated some of the inequality that the society has had. And that inequality has been slow to go away at USDA, and it's really affected people. There's been lawsuits and litigation. We could talk about some of that if people want. But this is a single program aimed at making payments to people who've been subjected to that kind of discrimination. And I'll say just again, it's a pretty powerful thing for the folks that experience that discrimination. And so we always try to keep that in mind as we do this work. So let's just talk about the context for a second. So first of all, we're talking about loans. Those of you that are familiar with USDA programs and with agriculture know that USDA does a lot of things that aren't loans. And we know that agriculture credit is really an essential thing for farmers. And so one of the ways that USDA has fit into the puzzle of agriculture, especially for people that are not super prosperous farmers, is to provide farm loans to people who can't get credit elsewhere. And that's the topic of this program. It's about discrimination that took place in USDA farm programs. And that's been a really important piece of USDA's work in helping modestly sized farms, and it's where it appears discrimination has been common. And so, if you think about it this way, it's USDA farm loan programs now run by FSA, once run by Farmers Home Administration. We're talking mainly about direct loans. A guaranteed loan can be eligible if it was USDA that did the discrimination, not the lender, the guaranteed lender. We have a cutoff line here that starts, the discrimination needs to have occurred before January 1 of 2021. We can say also that the eligibility is really very roughly as followed. You need to have been experienced discrimination in one of these FSA loan programs, and it can be on a wide variety of prohibited bases of discrimination. We'll talk about that when we get to it in the application, but I think the point now is to think that it's broad. It's not just race and ethnicity, it's also gender, sex, disability. So it's broad in that sense. You file an application, and your application seeks to show that there was discrimination, and you can receive up to $500,000. The vast majority of people, we feel confident, will not be getting that level of assistance. There are $2.2 billion out there appropriated for this. So it's real money. If people feel they've experienced discrimination, it's really worth investigating. We would just say a couple of quick things about the application. First of all, it's really going to be important to provide details here. The application gives you plenty of room to do that, and it seems essential in our view that people tell the story of what happened to them. You're going to need to provide a narrative that explains the farming you did or that you hope to do, your experience with the loans, even the financial consequences of discrimination. You're going to need to really spell out in detail. That is to tell that story. The second thing that is emphasized in the application, which we'll see a number of times, is the use of documents. The USDA really wants you to be able to document in some way, for example, that you farmed, that your ownership interest. If you had loans in the past, it's super helpful to find some record of those loans. And we'll talk about that in some detail, but the documents, as you can imagine, I would say paper-only process, but it's really an online process. And we don't have a hearing. It's not an arbitration. There's no discovery. It's really just about somebody telling their story and providing some supportive documents, and then it gets evaluated by a third party, a vendor that's been hired by USDA. So we think that the documents are really important. We can't skip those, and the narrative specifics are really important so that people's story be told. The deadline for the whole program is the end of October, October 31. Another important deadline in kind of mainstream of all this is September 6th. And what happens then, one of the things that's happened is, one of the first questions people asked USDA was, well, what about the documents that you have, the department has? And normally you could use FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act, to get at those. That would go fairly slow in reality, probably. So USDA has an email where you can send an email and get information about your past loan records. And they say if you get that request in by September 6th, they will definitely get your documents to you in time to use them for an October 31 deadline. So that's an also important and upcoming date. That is what I have as an introduction. Lindsay, what did I leave out that's crucial?
I don't think you missed anything for that point. So I think we can probably jump in if you want me to go ahead and share the application.
Yeah, so why don't we do that? What we're about to do is what we just sort of described as a walk through the application. So one thing that I might add, Lindsay, while you're doing that is, I'm going to call people old timers, and that would be like me, who remembers the discrimination cases against USDA. This is going to have a little bit of a feel of that. You're describing discrimination, but it's not a lawsuit. It's somewhat different than those old cases. And maybe the most important aspect of that is that a decision has been made here where we're essentially not going to have estate claims. So what we're going to see here in a second is that to file an application here, you either need to have experienced the discrimination or you need to have been assigned a loan that was subject to discrimination and the person that was discriminated against no longer has the loan. So to put it a different way, if granddad was discriminated against in the middle 2000s and has passed away, that granddad's estate cannot file in this process. So let's go for it. And we will, again, feel free to ask questions. We'll kind of breeze through this a little bit, especially the early part. Identification step, and USDA has 10 convenience steps. Lindsay, I'll let you talk about the must-made documentation. I'll just say in the first step, they're really asking you about information regarding yourself. And so they really would like people to do these applications online. It's possible to do them by mail. They certainly allow that, but they really do want you to download the application and do it there. And so as we know, it's easy to lose track of people. So this is where step one, you do basic identifying information about the person filing the application. Lindsay.
Yeah, I will just add, so hopefully all of you can see this screen more or less well. One thing to keep in mind, so Stephen said this application, it's long, it's 40 pages. It is an application that you have to read closely, and that's for a variety of reasons, but one of them is, every question that's asked may not be applicable to every person who's applying. So it really is important to kind of go through it slowly and carefully. And a big part of the application, besides just the specific questions they ask, but as Stephen mentioned, is going to be, there will be sidebars, a gray box on pages where USDA requests documentation. And just the initial two things we want to say on that, and it's at the very top of the application here, there's really two categories of documentation. So the application divides documentation into must documents, and as the word sounds, that means, it's a document that you need to submit with the application. There's also, probably more often than those must required documents, are what USDA calls may documents. And these tend to be ones that are helpful for the reviewers who are going to be looking at the application. And oftentimes, as it says here, a may document means that your application would be stronger if you provided it. And so you don't have to read between the lines too much to kind of see that if you are a farmer who is applying, or if you are working with a farmer who is applying, to the extent that people can provide some of those suggested may documents, it is probably a good idea to do so. And again, because there's no appeals for this program, it's really the one shot by October 31st. So, but we do want to make clear that that language, the must and the may, you'll see it with the documents. And I think in this step one, this is an example of it on page 2, where it says you must include at least 2 forms of identification. So that's an example where okay, you get to choose 2 from this box. But these gray boxes are what the documentation requests will look like. So Stephen, did you have anything else you wanted to say about step 1?
No, why don't we move right along?
Okay, so moving on to step 2. So step 2 is asking, and it's asking about the type of applicant, and that's getting to what Stephen mentioned a moment ago, where you can apply as an individual farmer who signed for a loan. So you would be the only borrower. You can also apply to this program if you were one of 2 co-borrowers. So that's often what we see with spouses. And then, as Stephen mentioned, you can also apply if you were assigned a debt. So if maybe a relative, a relative passed away, and before they did, they formally signed the debt over to you, and so now you're making payments on the loan. That is a way that you can apply. And you can also apply as a member of an entity. So what step 2 is getting at is really, who are you? Which category do you fall into? And a couple questions we've gotten, for people or for farms that applied for USDA loans as an entity, what the application is really concerned about is your percent ownership interest, because that's how payments will be made. For this program, payments are only made to individuals, not to businesses or legal entities. So the way that USDA has said they'll go about figuring out payments is, if you had a 30% ownership interest in an entity, then they would factor that in with any payment that you might be eligible for. So we won't go through in detail, but as you can see, so step 2 here, if you're a co-borrower, you would fill out this part B. So it's asking for information on the co-borrowers. If there's an entity, you're going to fill that out in part C. And it kind of walks you through all the things it's looking for. And then if there was an assigned or assumed debt, this, as we talked about, the important thing here is going to be who the original borrower was, because they would be the one who would have experienced the discrimination. So USDA wants to know who they are. So I think those are the basics of step 2 and the type of applicant you are. So then I guess maybe we'll pause for a second. Are there any questions so far on what we've mentioned?
There was one question that was Stephen answered live in the Q&A, but it was about a question. I think there was some confusion about whether how you get the document request to USDA. And Stephen, in your answer, you said that it's in the 4-page guide, and we posted the link to that in the chat. And then you said they want specific information in the request. Can you clarify that a little more, please?
Yes. So I would suggest going to the USDA website, where what they describe kind of what they want you to put in there when you request your documents. So they're going to want your name and actually the Social Security, although you can give your last 4 digits of your ID or other sort of form of identification, because they're rightly nervous about identity theft. And so what you can use that for is to get records that USDA may have and find regarding your loans that you got at USDA. So it's a way that you can kind of fill in the gaps, one hopes, regarding your own history with the department and those loans.
And
again,
oh,
sorry. You mentioned the deadline of September 6th, and the USDA has said that if you get that deadline met, they will guarantee your documents will be
not quite as strong as guarantee, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the sooner the better, obviously.
Yes, sooner the better. And also, I wouldn't rely solely on them to come up with your loan records. I would try hard to find other things that you can use as well to document some of the things that, for example, that we're about to talk about, your history with them and your experience farming. So step 3, as you can see the heading here, is eligibility for this program as a farmer and or rancher. So one of the things to remember here is that you can, there's reading between the lines and just sort of the way this whole thing is structured. The program is really out to help people who did farm and actually did get loans or have really clear evidence that they were denied of loans unfairly. So this piece asks you to describe your experience, your farm, if you were a farmer or rancher. And so they do a number of really quite detailed questions. And so, you can sort of imagine this is an effort to make sure that people don't just say, oh, hey, I farmed, and send something in, whether they farmed or not. So there's actually quite a number of fairly detailed questions about the sort of operation that you had. There are documents that they would like to see that would suggest that you did actually farm. And one of the things that we suggest is that you use this sort of space to really begin to tell the story of the person that was experiencing discrimination. So we would suggest you don't just write little short quips of, well, we had a cow-calf operation, or we direct marketed vegetables and say the county. You really want to give a lot more detail to your operation if you actually farmed. And it's not, we're talking a second, you can participate in this program if you did not farm but hope to farm and try to get a loan to farm. But if you did farm, you really want to set out exactly as much as you can the sort of state of your farm and what you were doing and where it was when the discrimination occurred. So that's the first big piece of what we'll call step 3. And so that kind of establishes your eligibility to get in the door. And this is so specific that they will ask you, for example, well, what was your farm number or your track number on your farms? And this is not 100% required, but it seems to carry a lot of weight with them. And, that's going to be fine for people who actually did participate in USDA programs. And we know that if you're in the farm programs and you're farming land, you will have, there are track numbers out there. But let's not forget that there are people that don't have farm numbers because they never participated in US programs. Let's say it's just grazing pasture or hayfield, and they just didn't buy crop insurance. They didn't do conservation stuff. They may not have a farm number, but a farm number will get you a long way in the, I'd say, in the eyes of this application of establishing your presence as an actual farmer, which is something that if you are a farmer, you really, really want to do. Ultimately, you can use other sorts of documents. I mean, it's really mundane stuff, is going to count. If you have old checkbooks that show you're getting expenses to repair farm equipment, that's beginning to show that you're a farmer. Or if you have receipts from sales or other expenses, if you did a Schedule F, that's great for your taxes as a farmer. That's this kind of documentation here that they seem to be aiming for, and you want to be able to provide that to establish yourself as a farmer, if you were. The second sort of half of this is, as I said, they give you the opportunity to go forward if you hope to farm but did not. And one thing that is going to happen here is, I think you can just sort of expect this to be a little more demanding. Again, they're trying to weed out people who didn't really farm and never really had much of a prospect of farming. So you're gonna want to put in the sort of preparations that you made to farm, really lay it out there. If you did FFA, you did classes in ag, you worked on a farm, you were a farm laborer, you helped on the farm growing up. All those are the sorts of things that you need to put in here that show that there's sort of a run up in your life that leads to trying to get a loan from USDA to farm. And so you really want to tell that story about what you did to prepare and how it is that you were ready, what you were going to use this loan for, what your operation was going to be. And again, the sort of credible details that you give will matter a great deal. This is a little bit, if you might call this an attempt to farm application. If this is what happens, it's going to be a little bit more uphill, but it's doable. You just need to describe what happened to you and what your experience was. Lindsay.
Okay. So any questions we should pause for regarding step 3?
I'm not seeing any.
Okay, well then we will move on to step 4. And as you are all probably gathering, several of these steps relate to eligibility in different ways. And just as you can apply for this program both if you actually farmed and if you were never able to, you can also apply to the program if you were a borrower of a USDA farm loan program. But as well, you can apply if you tried to become a borrower, but perhaps because USDA discriminated against you, you were never able to obtain a loan. So those categories of people are who step 4 is looking to kind of ask questions about. So in this first part at the top of step 4, what the application wants to understand is, if you participated in a USDA farm loan program, there are 2 main categories of programs. There's direct loans, so meaning that FSA most likely provided the loan to you directly. So when you're signing the promissory note, it'd be you and FSA. Or there's also, as Stephen mentioned early on, it is possible, though a bit harder, but if you had a guaranteed loan, meaning that you perhaps got a loan from a bank or a credit union and USDA guaranteed that loan, you can still be eligible for this program as long as the discrimination that occurred was by USDA and not the private lender. So, for this step, it's going to ask, did you have a direct loan or did you have a guaranteed loan with USDA? Those are the first kind of set of questions. And then the next part is going to be similar. Did you attempt to get a direct loan with USDA, but you were unable to? Or did you attempt to participate in a guaranteed loan program and you were unable to? So for these, again, the questions, they'll want to know the types of loans that you had. So for example, what you can see on the page before you now, this is the section on direct lending. Did you have an operating loan? Did you have an emergency loan or a micro loan? And, each of these types of loans would have had specific eligibility rules. They serve different purposes. For some farmers, they may know right off the bat, they may have all of the records they need to identify what kind of loan they had, but many farmers might not know exactly. And so, that can be another reason why it could be helpful to request records from USDA because those records would help identify it. It's also, if you can look back at any communications you've received from USDA that might provide information on the type of loan. And if you think about the purposes of the loan, if you got a loan so that, if it was a 1-year loan just so that you could operate your farm, chances are it was an operating loan. If you were, if you were a young person when you received the loan, right? So there's different ways if you're unsure exactly what type of loan to start thinking about it, but they do want you to put information in on that. And Stephen, do you have any other general tips for how folks might be able to figure out the exact type of loan if they don't know?
Yes, this is a little bit worrying to me. I think that people are likely to know what the purpose of the loan was that they got or hoped to get, but the names of these loans may well escape them. So I would check the boxes that you know, if you have the documents or can remember. But I think that you may be in particular, when we go to the next section and we talk about discrimination, for example, say the purpose of the loan that you are trying to get. So is it for operating expenses versus is it for buying land? Is something that can be just a little bit confusing.
Thank you. So I'll just kind of scroll through this. Again, the next section's on questions for people who were borrowers of guaranteed loans. So similarly, they're going to ask for the type of loan, the amount, things like that. And then finally, with step 4, it's going to ask for people who tried to get a loan, whether it was a direct or guaranteed. And so again, this is another one where the details are going to be really important. So, and there are places in the application, in here in section C3, it says describe the steps you took to try to get a loan. So if you remember what office you went to, if you happen to know who you spoke to. I mean, many people might not, but if you can provide details about what you had intended to use the loan for, why you were going to FSA to get a loan, and so any of those details are just going to help fill in your story, and so that the person reviewing it, essentially it comes down to, whether they believe it happened. So that those are the questions for step 4. And again, the final section is on, if you attempted to participate in a guaranteed lending program, but you were unable to, there'll be similar types of questions. The final thing I will note on this, though, I don't think we have time to go into it, but I would say, please email Stephen or I if this is an issue that affects you and you have questions on. By and large, for this application, you don't generally have to provide documentation of your citizenship or immigration status. The one exception is if you were an attempted USDA farm loan program borrower, but you never actually obtained a loan. And the reason for that is that anyone who has obtained a loan through USDA will have already had to provide documentation to show their citizenship or immigration status. And so if you didn't actually ever get a loan, then this application will require that you provide documentation that you are either a qualified alien or a US non-citizen national. And again, those are pretty specific meanings. Happy to go into detail on it with anyone who has questions, but I just wanted to flag that so folks know that for at least those people who didn't actually get loans, that might be an issue. Okay, so I think that's what we've got for step 4. So the next one, Stephen, step 5.
So step 5 is where we really get at discrimination that people experience. And so it's worth taking a few minutes here to talk about what discrimination means as far as this program is concerned. and who is protected under this program regarding discrimination. And it's worth saying off the bat that USDA doesn't give us very much help in terms of defining what counts as discrimination. So we're going to have to try to construct that a little bit as we go along. But let's just start here right at the top. And so when you talk about discrimination law, what's the sort of legal basis of this? You'll hear lawyers talk about the bases of discrimination. And so what we mean there is that what is it about you that where if somebody made a decision, here a loan decision, about that aspect of your identity, is that illegal? And so the basis of discrimination in this program are actually fairly broad. So the list here that you see at the very top and is then sort of spelled out in the next few sections is going to be a familiar one, right? I mean, we know that it's illegal to discriminate on the basis of race or national origin or your ethnicity. I mean, those are fairly familiar. They're all included here. But it's also, perhaps important to point out that we also talk here about sex and about gender identity, and that disabilities we mentioned, marital status. You can see these lists here. Your gender identity. I mean, the sort of things that are sort of society's changed, and the basis of discrimination for this program is really quite broad. It's protecting most people that I would think that would consider themselves to be non-conforming in sexuality. It covers people that are Hispanic, Latino, in discrimination law in general. If you're Hispanic or Latino, it's generally considered to be a discrimination based on national origin, though most people would think of that as ethnicity. So as you look down, let's say the basis of discrimination was race. You can see here, there are boxes to check to give you various choices. National origin, you can see here on C, where Hispanic or Latino is one of the choices, but then so are others. You can, on D, non-binary sexuality is covered here. So when we start talking about discrimination, the question, of course, first of all, is discrimination based on what? And here is where you identify yourself for the purposes of this program regarding that discrimination. But then the next question is, well, what does it mean to discriminate against somebody on that basis? And it's actually somewhat vague, even in the law itself. But in general, what we're talking about is when people are treated differently based on one of these prohibited bases. So are people being treated differently based on their race or based on their sex or based on the fact that they're disabled? And that's what you're trying to show in this application, that you were treated differently on one of these prohibited bases. So you've identified yourself, what lawyers call the protected class that you're in, and now you need to explain what happened to you, what was your experience, and why should an outside observer who reads this conclude that it was based on discrimination. And so we have a couple of suggestions here. One of the best ways to show that you experienced discrimination is to show that USDA did not follow its own rules when it dealt with you. So we know, for example, that USDA is supposed to assist people with applications. It is supposed to accept applications anytime somebody wants to submit one. But one of the common ways that discrimination occurs is that people are told, don't even bother, you won't have a chance. We hear, I mean, not all that long ago, I mean, we've talked to people who have been told women can't really farm, don't even bother. Well, that person may not have actually filed an application. So what you want to do is explain how you were mistreated or how USDA did not follow the rules when it dealt with you. It denied you for an incorrect reason. They said you didn't have management ability, even though you did, or they said you didn't have collateral for the loan, even though you did. You want to identify those ways that they broke their own rules. If you know, if by your observation, you can see that other people were treated differently, other people who are not in a protected class were treated differently, that's another important piece of the puzzle that you can use to sort of explain your experience of discrimination. So if you're Hispanic and you continue to see people walk into the office, get servicing, get loans that are non-Hispanic, and you just, no matter what you do, can't get a loan if you're Hispanic, that's what you want to describe here. You want to explain that experience. It's helpful in showing discrimination if you can show that they did not follow their own rules. It's also helpful if you can say through your own observation and experience that they treated people differently and they treated you worse. And interestingly, I mean, it doesn't even require your loan to be denied. They can make you a loan and still discriminate against you on the basis of the terms of the loan, for example. And we'll talk about that later. The old timers, I'll call us again, who can remember the USDA discrimination cases, may remember that in Pigford, the black farmer case, you were asked to name a white farmer who got the good treatment that you didn't get. There's nothing like that in this application. You don't have to name anybody specifically. If you want to, you can. I mean, you can say, I have a neighbor who had a similar operation to me. They would never let me make a loan and said that my operation couldn't be profitable. My neighbor, who had a very similar operation, frequently got FSA loans. That's a very helpful thing to be able to say if it's true, right? I mean, we're not making things up here. We're not trying to overstate, but just say your experience. So I'll say again, you want to emphasize the extent to which you were treated improperly, you were denied something you should have received, and to the extent you know it, it's helpful if you can say that you were treated differently based on your identity on these prohibited bases. And so it's really quite important to tell the details here. Really lay it out as to what actually happened, what discrimination you experienced if you're filling out this form. By the way, I don't think we mentioned this. Lindsay and I did that 4-pager that we put in the chat. We're also working on a much longer document that will be published in the next few days. You'll be able to find it on our website. And Lindsay mentioned it's dry as dust, but it will have a lot of details on these points and a lot of other things. So what are we leaving out here? I think that maybe that's I guess what we might do is mention a few common forms of discrimination. I think that might be slightly out of order of our plan, but so as I mentioned, discrimination can occur if you're denied a loan. If you've got a letter of denial, you want to really look at that closely and understand why. If you got a loan, they might have required you to have too much collateral, which can hurt your operation, or they may have underfunded your loan, or they may have charged you a higher interest rate than was proper. If you got into trouble and had difficulty paying the loan, they should have offered you loan servicing. That is to say, offer to reschedule your loan or defer payments. If they didn't consider you for loan servicing, or if they denied you loan servicing, that's a possible basis of discrimination. So these, I mean, again, you just need to say what happened in your experience. And in our longer guide, we'll have a bit more explaining how some of those scenarios tended to work out. So with that, why don't we go back to you, Lindsay, and talk about step 6.
Thank you. And I'm going to make just one final point on step 5, and that is, if you notice at the top of every page, it says instance. number. And the thing to know about this is USDA wants to know about every time, essentially, that they discriminated against you. And so they ask several questions, as you can see, and there's several pages worth of boxes for you to fill in a response. So, if you tried to apply for a loan every year for 3 years and they just denied you every time or discouraged you, you can write a separate accounting of each of those, and you would just make note, instance 1, you would go through and answer all the questions about what happened the first year. Instance 2, you could do the same thing for the second year, and so on. So just be aware that you can write about as many experiences of discrimination as you experienced yourself, but just be aware that it seems like they're trying to kind of organize it so they get a sense of how often this occurred and in what ways. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear.
Thank you for clarifying that, Lindsay. I had that exact question.
Okay, yeah. And there are, they ask a lot and they provide a lot of prompts, and it takes time and energy and thought. But if you repeatedly experience discrimination, we would encourage you to write about every time that you recall. Okay, so moving on. So step 6, and I know we're going to try to go through these last ones a little quicker just so we can have time for questions and answer at the end. Step 6, this is one of those steps that it may not apply to everyone. So this step is only for people who have farmed or ranched. And what this step is asking about are really the economic losses that a person suffered because of the discrimination. So, for example, some of these questions are going to try to get at, did you lose land, farmland? Did you, was your house a part of the collateral for a loan you took out with USDA? Did your house get foreclosed on? So they do a lot of prompting, but really it seems that step 6 is mostly looking for economic losses, meaning monetary losses. So loss to land, loss to homes. There's another section in here that's specifically about, whether you experienced any offsets or garnishments or deficiency adjustments because of the discrimination. So, for example, if you ended up defaulting on a loan, if USDA didn't provide you any loan servicing options, if then you had wages garnished, or you had money taken out of your Social Security check, or if the Treasury kept money from your tax refund, all of those are economic impacts. And if you can trace them to the discrimination that occurred, you want to write about them here. And I think what it seems like this step in particular is really concerned about is how you are kind of calculating that loss. So as you write it out, this is probably another section where it's really important. Any documentation that you have can show, if you lost land, if you have documentation of that, of a foreclosure notice, or garnishments, if you have any receipts or documents that will show that's going to be important to provide here. And finally, there is kind of a catch-all question where they just say, do you have any other economic loss that they don't ask about? And for this one, they really want you to spell out how you are reaching whatever number it is that you come up with. So, if you're trying to calculate, you weren't able to maybe expand your farm because you didn't get a loan, really spell out how you think that affected your farm, and in terms of a monetary value, what you lost because of that. And I just want to caution people, though, this program is not intended, and it will not compensate, I think, people for the losses that they suffered. So if you lost $100,000, just to keep a round number, it's not like this program is then going to say, okay, here's the $100,000, but it all factors in. And it still is a little unclear to us, sort of the formula that might be used to determine payments, but they are clear in the materials that it's not kind of a one-to-one compensation for losses. So Stephen, do you have anything to add on that before we move on?
I do not. Any questions?
I don't see questions from the audience, but I have a quick question. Lindsay, on that last point you made
Mhm.
about the inclusion for other losses. What are your thoughts on including, let's say you incurred a health crisis as a result of stress based on not getting the loan, and you weren't able.
And what you cut out there at the end? So the health crisis and what else? Okay, we may have lost Nicole, so I'm just going to pick up from that until she comes back. I think, I think that's a great question, because the reality is, as we know, there are so many effects of discrimination, and they're not all monetary. In fact, most of them probably just the emotional, the psychological, the physical, all of that comes into play. And, we encourage farmers to tell the story as it happened. As far as step 6 goes, though, it does appear that this step in particular is really looking for that economic, that monetary value. So, if you can say that, yeah, this health crisis happened and you had to go see the doctor frequently and you incurred all of these extra bills, if there's a way that you can break it down into the cost of that, then I think that's absolutely something, that you could include in there. You just want to make sure you're tying it into the discrimination that happened, because you really want to connect those dots and keep them as close to cause and effect as you can. Is that what you would advise as well, Stephen?
That sounds exactly right. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, Lindsay and I puzzle over this very question because so I know you guys, it's hard to absorb all these words, but in the application, they really do kind of direct you toward purely economic losses. And we've thought about this a fair bit, and I think our conclusion is, to the extent that there were what lawyers would call mental distress or other sort of emotional costs, or therefore physical and medical costs, it's worth it to explain it. And truth is, we really don't know how they're going to calculate all of this and come up, if they find discrimination, come up with a number. But at a minimum, it's part of your story. And so I would include it, and not to like turn everything into a dollar, but frankly, that's what we have here, right? And so the sort of anguish of mental distress is, as Lindsay says, of course, the most important thing. But if it costs you money, it's worth including. And they may not pay much attention to that, but they might. And if you do include that sort of stuff, I think it makes sense, if you're up for it, to really connect those emotional or distress issues and health issues with the discrimination. I mean, that when it comes to these money questions, assume for a second that the discrimination occurred. Now put your energy into connecting that discrimination to economic harms. That's really sort of your big job in step 6.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. I don't see any other questions right now from attendees. If folks have questions, you can put them in the Q&A box. You can raise your hand.
And I noticed we just have 5 minutes left. So I would say we will go as quickly as we can through these final steps, but please raise your hand or throw those questions in, because we definitely want to make sure we answer anything, any outstanding issues. So
great, thanks.
And you can of course follow up with us. Up in the beginning is my email, Lindsay. I assume you put your email in, or will. The document, the 4-pager has our email on it. So feel free to follow up and contact us. And Nicole, if you want to have us back to talk about some of these things again, we're of course happy to do that.
Absolutely. And guys, the world is not going to shut off at 2 o'clock. So if we go a little over, we've got the time for that. Yes, Stephen, your email is in the chat. All of the links for flag and your guide are in the chat as well. So did you guys wanted to, any
Yeah,
other
maybe
points?
just
Yep.
I'll try to. I know I'm the one slowing things up, but we'll try to buzz through these last couple. So,
Great.
step 7 is actually a question that I think people do ask, and you will remember yet again the old USDA discrimination cases. And so one thing that comes up a lot is, well, how do those connect to this process, this application process? So there are a couple of things to remember. First, you can participate in this program no matter what you did in the old USDA discrimination cases. If you did the old cases and won, fine, you can go again. USDA, in fact, it looks like if you won in one of these old discrimination cases, that will sort of be automatic evidence of discrimination. So if you're eligible, you're likely to have success in this program. But if you did one of the old cases and did not get an award, you can still go forward with this. If you didn't participate at all, it doesn't matter. Go ahead. I mean, in fact, for most people, probably, the discrimination would have all occurred after these old cases. But people have long memories, and these cases were important for the people that were involved in them. So the one thing so if you have success in one of these old cases, use it. And if you have a story and old records you can get from them, use those as well. The same as if you filed a discrimination complaint against USDA, or if you're one of the few people that just did a lawsuit against USDA. All of that stuff can be included. You should not penalized in any way, with the exception that if you did get money in one of the old cases and you win again in this program, USDA says it will reduce your payment somewhat. My guess, not by a lot, not enough to discourage you from doing this process, but enough to sort of acknowledge that you did get another payment. So again, if you have further questions, we're happy to follow up with those. Lindsay.
Okay, well, step 8's real quick. This is just a place essentially for you to add anything else into your application that is not covered in the other 39 pages. So if you need to write more, if you think there's more relevant information and a question wasn't asked about it, this is the step where you get to do that. Okay. Okay, step 9, Stephen.
And so step 9 is a bit of bad news about all this, and that is, if you have the good news of receiving a check out of this program, that you do get financial assistance, you should know that that financial assistance is taxable. IRS thinks it's taxable, let's put it that way. USDA is trying to figure out a way that you can they can deal with that in some way. I don't know if that will really happen. What we need to say right now, though, is you should expect that money to be taxable income. You'll get what the IRS calls a Form 1099 that says you got this as income. So just beware. Lindsay.
Okay.
Wrap it up, please.
Yeah. 1 minute to go. So the final step, there's really 2 parts to it. This is what they call signatures and certifications. Essentially, if you are applying yourself as a farmer, you will be asked to certify an initial and sign this page that you should read carefully, but essentially says that everything that you have included in the application is true to the best of your knowledge. So that's the first page is for the person who's filling out this application or on behalf of. The second signature page is if you are getting help from, there's several cooperators who are working with farmers to fill out applications, or if you had a guardian, or, anyone who's really going through this application with you and helping you, they are asked to similarly certify that to their knowledge, the information in there is accurate, that they received the information from the farmer who's applying, and that, that there's no fee for this program. So you're just acknowledging that you have informed the farmer that the program does not require any sort of payment in order to apply. So those are the final 2 pages. Again, certifications, you're making these certifications and you're putting your signature under oath. So just important to be truthful with it. Okay, so we are, I think, right at 2 p.m. Eastern time. Nicole, any final questions come in?
I don't see any questions from the attendees. If you have questions, go ahead and raise your hand. I can unmute you, or you can put a question in the Q&A box. I have a couple of my own other clarifying questions, if you don't mind. Stephen, you mentioned at the outset, well, let me ask my question quick, and then we'll go to Pamela. But you mentioned at the outset that there is actually a limit of $500,000, I believe, per applicant. So there's a limit, but that doesn't mean that you don't put in all of the amounts, right, that you think qualify. In fact, it's probably better that you do and don't think about that limit so much, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
Just lay it out there and
Yeah.
let them worry about a final number if you're in that position.
Oh, we just had, okay, well, now she had her hand up and now she lowered her hand. Pamela, did you want to, there we go. Let me unmute. Oh, there we go. Go ahead, Pamela.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Greetings, everyone. I noticed that the chat was actually not working. I don't know if that's for everyone. So I don't know if that may be the reason why you don't have any questions.
Oh,
It says that it's not disabled.
I did not know that, and thank you so much. Nobody's seeing things in the chat? Katrina,
Well, at least I'm not able to type in a chat because it says that it's not disabled for people to make any
Oh.
comments in the chat.
Thank you for clarifying. So you may not be able to type in the chat box. I'm not sure about that. You are seeing posts, so they're coming up from the panelists in the chat box? Or do you not? Are you not able
Yes,
to?
yes,
Okay.
I do see the email addresses of Lindsay and I have the other I think his name is Steve. I have it written down.
I'm glad you got those.
Yes.
I'm sorry if you're not able to enter stuff in the chat. Forgive us for not having that set up. However, you are able to enter your Q&A, your questions in the Q&A, and I see we have another one come in. Yes, chat is disabled. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. But now we have another. Thank you, Pamela. Did you have another? Do you have a question that you wanted to ask?
No, I didn't have a question. I just wanted to point that out. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bummer. Sorry.
Yeah, I didn't know about that. Katrina, I've unmuted you.
Yes.
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. Yes. I learned a lot today within this hour, and I'm glad you guys took the time out to help us along the way. But I really didn't have no question. I just wanted to let you know I really appreciate what you guys doing.
Thank you. I
Thank you,
appreciate what they're
Katrina.
doing too.
I appreciate it. We appreciate it.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands. Oh, Pamela?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
I believe someone mentioned that there was a website where there was going to be a document uploaded later. Can someone type in that web address, please?
Yes, that's going to be the flag web address, and we can post that in the chat box. So look in the chat box and it'll be there.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank
and
you.
Thank you again, everyone. Very, very valuable information.
And Nicole, I'm gonna just put in the chat, there is actually a very helpful document called a frequently asked document. And it specifically with regard to anyone who might be wanting to request documents from USDA, number 18 in that FAQ lays out exactly the information that you need to include in the email to USDA. So I put a link to the website and you can download the FAQ document. Again, I believe it's question number 18. It spells out in detail, but just since that deadline is coming up quickly of September 6th, just want to make sure people know exactly what they need to include if they want to request documents.
Oh, good. Thank you so much for that. Okay, I'm gonna check the Q&A box one more time. I've not seen any new answers or questions. Let me just, if folks want to hang on, just to be very clear about this. The entire evaluation is made based on this application. We don't anticipate follow-up phone calls, emails with applicants. Is that correct? Right.
Yes, and actually, I know we're about out of time. You can get some help with this. There are grassroots farm organizations that will help you. If you send an email to us or Nicole, we'll direct you. If you go to USDA's website, they do have an 800 number where you can call and get help. But I would really, we really worry though that there are people out there that you just can only call them scam artists. They're telling people, give us money and we'll make sure you succeed in this program. There are lawyers trying to sign people up that want a really high percentage of whatever money that you get. Lawyers aren't required. If anybody promises you that they'll get you money and you have to pay them, they're just not telling you the truth. And so there is assistance out there that you will not have to pay for. So you know,
Yeah.
it's hard to sort all that out, but it's important.
I'm glad you mentioned that. Okay. I'm not seeing any other questions come in. So I want to thank you so much, Stephen and Lindsay, for all the really important information that you provided. And thank you to everybody who joined us today. Remember that, again, you'll be able to watch the webinar, including the information that was produced in the chat box at our UMES Extension website, or reach out to either any of us directly, and certainly reach out to the folks at FLAG if you want more information and also assistance with the application. So everybody, please take good care, and thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.